no time to talk. Music loud and women warm. I've been kicked around since I was born. You know it's alright.
Welcome back to another Staying Alive podcast brought to you by the Alive Advocacy Movement.com. Hi, I'm your host, Pippa Star, for today. Welcome. You want to find out more about what we do and what we're about? Hop over. If you happen to be in a position where you can see the scan code, if you're watching this visually. If not, don't worry. You can simply go to aliveadvocacymovement.com to learn lots more what we're about. Another fantastic special guest today. Looking forward to getting into it. Please welcome everybody with a big round of applause for one and only Dr. James Martin. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you become involved with this space.
Sure. Thanks, Pippa. Thanks for having me. So I'm a criminologist. So I run the undergraduate, I'm director of the undergraduate criminology program at Deakin Uni. And I've spent most of my career, so over a decade now, mainly studying illicit drug markets. So I got into that by studying online illicit drug markets. So there was a big original one called Silk Road, which some of your listeners may have heard of, which operated on the dark web, and it was a really interesting way to get into illicit drug research because unlike normal illicit markets, which happen in person, online drug markets are actually highly visible, even though they're on the dark web. These pages are set up kind of like eBay, and they've got very transparent pricing. They've got customer feedback reviews. So, there's a whole heap of information there that's really useful for us as researchers to understand not just how dark web markets work, but how illicit markets work more broadly. So mainly working in that space. And then over the last couple of years, really since the start of 2023, I've been working more and more in the illicit nicotine space. So that's having to do with illicit tobacco, vaping products, and other nicotine products here in Australia. And that's really been the result. It's not an area I could have ever imagined working in because these were legal, available products that we didn't have black markets for, or not large black markets for, at least until pretty recently. So it's only been in the last couple of years as these have developed into really serious criminal problems that they've started to attract the attention of criminologists like myself.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that, as you say, there hasn't been an illicit market as such in the grand scheme of things in this space. And all of a sudden you become interested. Look, I guess it's a double-pronged question. Um, why have you become interested in this space all of a sudden? Is it because things have become more prominent, or is it because you're just a plant from big tobacco? The people, you're just maybe trying to deter people from what's really happening.
Yeah, that has been a slur that I've encountered. People have accused me of being some kind of shill for big tobacco because I have advocated for improving access to legal nicotine products. I think that is undoubtedly, part of the solution, something that should be on the table, because black markets don't come out of anywhere, and there are some black markets. Black markets happen when there's restrictions on supply of any good or service for which there's readily available supply, and there's high demand. Some black markets, a black market in itself is not necessarily a sign of policy going wrong. So for example, you can think of black markets for, say, stolen goods, for example, or for child exploitation material, right? Those are black markets that we're prepared to put up with, and prepared to put up with the dangers and the costs of policing, and there's no price we wouldn't pay as a society to have those things illegal. We're not going to create a legal market for any of those things, and there are plenty of other black markets that would put into that category as well. But with nicotine, we've got really serious questions to ask there. Nicotine is, in and of itself, isn't associated with really substantial health harms. The overwhelming majority of health harms that come from nicotine consumption come through smoking and the inhalation of combustible materials. Vapes, I mean, there are significant health concerns around vaping products, but the research that we have is that they're substantially less harmful than smoking. So if you're a smoker, it's a no-brainer as to whether you should be smoking or vaping. Um, and the approach, the highly restrictive approach we've taken to vaping here with our, formerly prescription-only model. Now we've got the pharmacy model, and I'm sure your listeners are well aware of the flaws, in that approach. These are products that in many other countries are actively promoted, particularly to smokers as a means of reducing, public health burden. And in Australia, the really restrictive approach that we have, I don't think is striking the right balance between protecting people's health, respecting people's individual agency and choices. And it's certainly not striking the right balance, in my view, in limiting the systemic violence and other problems that come from having a really large and profitable black market.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting to hear a little bit about your background when you mentioned that you sort of studied other illicit markets and online markets and in that space. So obviously it's just basically transferring a skill set or applying the same principles. What are the sort of principles that are causing, massive increases in youth crime around tobacco and vapes, and causing these fire bombings in your experienced opinion?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so you're exactly right. So the same principles, the same theories, the same dynamics that we observe in other illicit markets, other illicit drug markets, we're increasingly observing here in the nicotine market in Australia. And so, one of the things that's really capturing people's attention, people who don't vape or people who don't smoke, is the violence that's surrounding this. So we're closing in on nearly 200 fire bombings, which I know you're well across,
Gee,
Pippa. It's been really
yeah.
useful having your
A,
fire bombing counter. Uh,
yes, a live
Thinking of,
advocacy movement forward
yeah,
slash fire bombings, or liveadvocacymovement.com/fire bombings if you want to follow along.
yeah, that's a really useful resource. And it's unfortunately it's exactly what we did predict. I think it was 6 years ago I first started commenting in this space, saying, hey, tobacco taxes are going to cause this problem. We're going to get a black market, and black markets emerge. Systemic violence emerges in black markets basically because there's a lack of formal ways to govern how the market operates. So, for example, Pippa, if I was to buy a car off you, or you wanted to sell your business to me, and something went wrong with that transaction, well, there's a range of legal mechanisms that I can go through, or that you could go through if I didn't hold up my end of the bargain. Small claims court. There's commercial law. There's a whole bunch of things that govern
Sure.
how that transaction takes place. And if somebody does the wrong thing, then there are penalties that the government imposes that they keep people honest. Keep people as honest as much as possible. If we're dealing in something that's illegal, on the other hand, then we don't have access to any of those government provided formal dispute resolution mechanisms. So if you want to sell me some crack cocaine, for example, not that I'm suggesting you do that, but if you did, and then you decided to welch on the deal, or I did, then obviously we can't go to the cops, or you can't go to the small claims court, to try and get redress. And so what happens is that you get violence starts emerging as a way to enforce informal contracts. So and sadly we've seen examples of this with vape deals gone wrong. Where
Yeah,
people have been
there's been some
injured.
stabbings and yeah,
Yeah,
kids
I
nearly
mean,
burnt in their beds.
yeah, it's absolutely astounding. It's even just saying that, a vape deal gone wrong. It's like we're talking about, yeah, crack cocaine or methamphetamine or
It's
something. You know,
vapes.
yeah, it's bizarre. But it is absolutely predictable. This happens. So informal contracts is one way. A way to enforce things when things go wrong. One of the other reasons that we're seeing increased amounts of systemic violence as well is because it's a way for different groups who are competing for the trade, and this is a trade, that is I mean, it's always difficult to estimate precise numbers, but we're talking, more than $1 billion in Australia, the total illicit nicotine market, and possibly significantly higher than that. Credible estimates go up to $2 billion and more.
Yeah.
That's a huge amount of money. And in a legal marketplace, businesses will compete with one another using all sorts of means. They'll compete on price, they'll compete on customer service, they'll use advertising to try and build their brand, all those kinds of things. Some of which organized crime groups will do, so price is one of the ways that they're competing, particularly in the tobacco space. Illicit tobacco is very cheap here in Australia. And it's been one of the interesting queries or questions that we've been exploring, but haven't got good answers for yet. But one of the reasons it seems that the price is so low is because the competition is really fierce. Often you will get
Yeah.
cartels forming. So people would have heard of the famous cocaine, sort of Colombian cartels, Mexican drug cartels before. A
Right.
cartel is basically when organized crime groups start cooperating with one another to set a floor price. And they do that so they can make more money. But that doesn't seem to be happening so much in the tobacco space in Australia. This cartel hasn't formed, or at least hasn't formed yet. So price is one of the ways that they compete with one another, and that's similar to a legal business. But one of the other ways that they compete with one another that you don't see in legal businesses is they use violence. So
Yeah.
we're
That's
seeing these fire bombings take place, and those can be separated as well into two kind of different categories depending on who the victims are. On the one hand, you will have organized crime run premises themselves. So, an organized crime group sets up its own shop selling tobacco or vapes or, whatever other products, and violence will be used to put that competitor out of business or to intimidate them or both. The other, I don't know, more worrying one in my view is when you get legal store owners or otherwise, store owners who are otherwise just involved, the main sort of bread and butter is legal products, but might be selling some illicit products under the counter, or they're not, and they're approached by an organized crime group and they say, right, you're going to start selling our vapes or our tobacco products, and if you don't, well, you've seen what happens on the news, and so you get people
yeah.
who've been threatened, extorted, and one of the problems is we only hear about really instances where people say no and they're firebombed. We don't hear about all those other instances where presumably a lot of store owners are saying, okay, yeah, I do watch the news. I've got concerns for my business or for the safety of myself or my family, and they say yes. So that's really
Well,
concerning, and that's
and
another reason violence happens.
surely our governments, and you've been on a few inquiries in that at state level and whatnot. Um, surely our governments must see what's going on, and they don't seem to be addressing these issues. I mean, I've been listening and studying a lot of press conferences, particularly from our health minister. And it's just, yeah, we know there's a black market and it's going to be hard, but there's not really addressing the core reasons why the black market is operating. I mean, what do governments have to do to really comprehend the supply and demand situation or the basic principles of prohibition that is going on? And for those who are listening and saying, "Oh, look, it's not prohibition. It's not prohibition. You can get your vape at any chemist across Australia wherever you want." Yeah, right. Well, the facts of the matter is there's only about there's basically 0.2 when it all boils down to it, due to the lack of interest of chemists wanting to stock this product in Australia. There's only about 0.23%, I worked out, James, 0.23% of all vapors are actually obtaining a legal vape from a chemist. And obviously in WA and Tasmania you require a prescription. And and I draw this interesting analogy. You may or may not be aware that even Winston Churchill, during
Right.
the famous periods of the 20s prohibition and the Volstead Act, would you believe Winston Churchill was able to get alcohol with a prescription? So
Yeah.
look,
No.
where are the governments going wrong? What can they do to fix this? And why aren't they recognizing what it is for what it is?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think there are a lot of people working in government who I think are probably well intentioned, and who
Mm.
do genuinely have are motivated by good things. I think one of the things the government probably doesn't talk about very openly is the amount of money that is made or has been made historically by tobacco taxes. So, tobacco, the primary purpose historically for tobacco taxes in Australia has been for the purpose of generating money for the government, which, of course, they go on and spend, on healthcare and housing and education and all the other things that we want government spending money on. But that's been the primary historical function. And it was only in, really the last few decades, sort of from the 1990s onwards, that increasing tobacco prices specifically was justified under the guise of public health. And there is research to show that increasing the price of legal tobacco is a good way to get people to quit. The problem is that there's a sweet spot there, and this isn't something that you can just continually, indefinitely increase without starting to get really serious unintended consequences. And we've talked about violence as one of those, but one of the other really important unintended consequences as well is the proliferation of really cheap tobacco. So, you can easily get, anyone in any, not even a major urban center, pretty much anywhere in the country, you can walk down to your local high street, wherever that
Yeah.
is, and find a shop that will sell you a pack of cigarettes for $10 or $15. That's a price that we haven't seen for legal cigarettes for over a decade now. So there's much more cheap tobacco around now than there was 5 years ago, and that's because there's so much money to be made by evading the taxes. And so many consumers can't afford to buy legal tobacco anymore. So that price signal that the government is trying to send by saying, right, okay, we're going to increase the price of tobacco to get people to stop smoking is now being actively undermined by the policy itself, because it's created this
Mm.
black market that is now, flooding the market with really cheap tobacco that we haven't seen in a very long time.
So we've gone too far. We've gone past the point of diminishing returns now. So what you're saying is, and this has got to be controversial. Do we have to cut the price of cigarettes to price the black market out now? Is that what we've got to do? I mean,
Yeah,
vapes are another story.
yeah, that's right. And I think it's useful to consider the vapes and cigarette markets side by side because they do concern, even though there's very
Mm.
significant differences in their health impacts, they do concern the delivery of nicotine, which is, of course, a very popular drug, not just here but elsewhere. Yeah, look, I think the government needs to. I think that as an option certainly needs to be on the table.
Mm.
We can't just continue running with the assumption that this tax is doing what it's intended to do, and that the problems that have been caused by raising it to such an extraordinary degree, to the point where Australia has the most expensive cigarettes in the world. Um, we need to, yeah, there needs to be a robust evaluation, and I think, if necessary, a recalibration, which may include lowering taxes. Yeah, I think that needs to be on the table, and particularly when we look at other countries. So, Australia, the Australian government, and a lot of people working in this space like to, I mean, you hear it all the time, that we're world leaders in this space.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it depends what criteria you're evaluating. If you're talking about the number of policies that have been passed, and how repressive those policies are, sure, Australia is the world leader in passing tobacco control policies. But have they been effective? Well, no. There's actually other countries that do a much better job, and who are the real world leaders in reducing smoking prevalence. And overwhelmingly, they've done it not by pricing smokers out of the market, but by increasing access to less harmful nicotine alternatives. So vapes are one of those.
But
Of
it's
course,
a big tobacco conspiracy, isn't it? It's like because aren't vapes just put in the market by big tobacco?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah. It's incredibly frustrating.
because
There's
the vapes get the kids to start wanting to smoke again, like and then so we get on to the second. At least that's the public health messaging.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. So there's two kind of, yeah. So you'll hear this in repeated ad nauseum by government and associated agencies that the line is vapes are employed by big tobacco to hook a new generation of nicotine addicts, and it's incorrect on a number of levels. One, vapes overwhelmingly are not made by big tobacco companies. They represent a threat to their business model. You have seen
Mhm.
big tobacco companies moving into the vape space, but that's because they've realized belatedly that vapes are a serious threat to their business model, and if they
Well,
want to.
I'm sorry, Dr. James, but we've got to be really careful here because that's direct conflict with what our health minister is saying. I can quote him on many press conferences.
Oh yeah.
He is convinced that big tobacco are hooking a whole new generation. Now, I've actually put a question to the health minister here in Australia. Very important question, and also a few thousand people are going to join me in a petition behind this question. Is why haven't you taken big tobacco to court? Why haven't you? I mean, we took big tobacco to court with the plain packaging and won. And big tobacco are the fair income that big tobacco are hooking a whole new generation. Well, why haven't they taken the court yet? And if they're not hooking, if it's not big tobacco, as you say, James, then why is this the public health message coming from our health minister?
Well, I think it's a convenient justification for the policies that they have in place, and and that's only part of the incorrect sort of messaging there. The other one is this, idea that vapes are a ploy to hook a new generation to nicotine addiction, and this is one of the ones that's been incredibly frustrating because a lot of people, particularly people who aren't that familiar with vaping, massively overestimate the number of teens who are vaping. So first up, the government's own statistics show that the numbers are not that high. So over 70% of teens have never tried a vape in Australia. The majority of teens who do vape do so infrequently, consistent with casual experimentation. And it's only around 3.5% of teens are vaping daily, which that's not great. We don't want teens vaping. We don't want teens drinking. We don't want them, taking illicit drugs or doing other dangerous things. But we need to keep the numbers in perspective. It's small in overall terms. It's fewer than the proportion of teens who were smoking daily a decade ago. And the overwhelming majority of people who vape in Australia are not under 18. They're adults. That gets lost in the messaging. But well, it doesn't get lost in the messaging. It's
Well,
actively it's
this
actively concealed.
they're spending a damn lot of money to educate kids, and I can show you a video. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I can show a video that is about 3.5 years old that was pushed out through the school system and it was funded by the Cancer Council and the Australian government that taught kids how to buy vapes, where to buy vapes, how to use a vape, and what sort of flavors they come in, and how to make sure that you can get one with nicotine in it. So you kind of wonder, with a lot of money also being recently spent and announced again, that they're going to have these education programs in schools to educate kids how to vape. Now, as you just said there, James, there's roughly about 3.5, 4% roughly of daily vaping use. It's like they want to sort of push the kids to start vaping, maybe to suit the narrative. I don't know. But look, James, have you heard of the DARE program, the D.ARE program in your studies in the USA? Very popular under the Reagan administration in the 80s in the USA.
I think I know what you're referring to, but I mean, look,
Right.
I don't think the government has a secret agenda to get kids vaping. I could see how. So,
I'm not saying that they do. I'm just saying, look, we've got all the hallmarks of prohibition. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. That we've seen with vapes, with fire bombings, with tobacco, lots of violence, lots of money, lots of billions of dollars lost in tobacco excise, going offshore, probably feeding into sex trafficking and all sorts of other worst possible imaginable crime syndicates. But we're, we're seeing this situation just seem to be, dare I say, petrol put on fire on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, I think that's certainly the case that policies that are in place at the moment are making these problems worse rather than better. But this, just to get back to the notion of
Sure.
children,
Yeah.
just for
Sorry.
a second, is this is exactly what we saw in previous eras of the war on drugs, where there was this myth that dealers would hang outside schools and try and get kids hooked on drugs. Just overwhelmingly, that's just not true. It wasn't the case then, and the reason for that isn't necessarily because drug dealers are really nice people and they care about the welfare of kids. It's usually because kids make really poor consumers. They don't have much money. Why would you create a product and market it towards a population who can't afford it? And that's borne out in the statistics that we have here in Australia. That most people, overwhelming majority of people who vape are not kids. They're adults.
That is true. And look, I guess the point is mentioning the DARE program. Not to say that the government is intentionally going down those roads, and nor did they in the USA back in the 80s. The Reagan, or Nancy Reagan, who was one of the champions of the DARE program, which was a drug program to educate kids in schools about the use of illicit drugs and how not to use them, how to avoid them, but this is what they look like and this is what they do. It was known on a number of studies. There's a number of studies I can source online that sort of say, hey, that was a failure. That was an abject failure.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, abstinence-based approaches, whether it's to do with underage sexual activity or underage illicit drugs, I think young people are pretty good often at sniffing out when they're being told incorrect information or misleading information. And unfortunately, one of the problems associated with that is it denies us the opportunity to give kids, accurate harm reduction information that they need to know, that they should know, because if they feel like the information they're getting is not trustworthy, then that undermines, the credibility and the opportunity to give them really important messages.
Look, we're hearing reports now. There was a Roy Morgan survey done that was mentioned in one of the newspapers just a matter of weeks ago. That the journalist, I believe it was the Sydney Morning Herald, mentioned that there was up to 300,000, out of around about 1.5 million vapers in Australia may have quit vaping. They didn't actually say return to smoking, to be fair. They said have quit vaping. But look, as I know, and I'm currently working on Australia's largest adult vaping consumer survey right now. If you haven't got on it, get it done at Alive Advocacy Movement .com/the survey, or just survey. Get onto that. Yeah, we need to see some real numbers here, don't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, the government actually has pretty robust numbers through its own National Drug Strategy Household Survey that they run. One of the problems with it is it only runs every 3 years, so we're not able to track the impact of the recent restrictions on vaping, through that. But we've been able to track things, up till now, and we've seen in the last 4 years, so between 2019 and 2022-23, we saw in that 4 year period, we saw the largest reduction in smoking in around 30 years in Australia, just in that 4 year period.
Which is great
And
news.
it's fantastic news. But well, most likely, and we're doing more detailed quantitative analysis to establish this at the moment, but it's very likely that the reason for that is because of the proliferation of vaping products, which, in other countries is celebrated as a public health success. But here, because vapes have been actively opposed by the government and by nearly all of the public health establishment, that's something that's, I think, not being talked about as loudly as it would have is if it was a public health led initiative like it's been in the UK or New Zealand or other comparable countries.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess the next main question I have, how should we really educate youths moving forward? How should we educate the public moving forward? I believe, and this is just my opinion, but I'd rather get your educated thoughts on how should public health move forward to educate the public at various ages about the effects of vaping, and the real science, and how does that play out with from a criminology perspective of outcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. The details of how you do that, I think would have to be worked out. But in terms of the basic model, I would embrace the approaches that have been successfully used overseas. So, all we need to do is go across the ditch to New Zealand. They've had very clear public health campaigns there that have said if you're a smoker, and you're thinking about vaping, well, you should switch. That's the best thing to do for your health. If you're not, if you don't do either, if you're not a smoker, then vaping is associated with health risks, and you shouldn't do it. I don't think that's an overly complicated message for anyone. And I think that should be the basic underlying message.
Look, here's the deal. Look, I speak to kids, I speak to grandparents, right? But I can tell you now, the kids are laughing. They know that there is no way that they can remove their nail polish off their fingers with e-liquid. They know that they can't kill the weeds in their backyard with e-liquid. So, these sort of claims are being made by various public, state, and federal public health authorities. What is the danger in telling our kids, or for that matter, enraged, morally panicked, and justifiably so parents, there's such sort of furphies or misinformation, disinformation, exaggerations?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you said there is accurate. There have been studies that have shown the presence of pretty dangerous chemicals and things that are in vapes, but they're often, and I've never seen any compelling evidence otherwise, that they're in trace amounts. So, things that are, yes, that might be, in a vape, you might find formaldehyde in a vape, but you find formaldehyde in certain fruits and vegetables as well, and it's the common saying in pharmacology and toxicology is the dose makes the poison. So, if you drink too much water, you will die, of that, and so water itself can be, very deadly to human health if you drink too much of it. So it's all about, what you're consuming in what quantities. It's not just about, whether something is detectable in a trace quantity or not.
Sure, that might be the science, but if kids are losing trust in the public health message they're being told, from a criminology point of view, what are the risks moving forward if there's lack of trust in government health messaging?
Well,
I mean, I've spoken to kids and they're laughing, saying, "Oh yeah, ha, as if it is."
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the biggest danger is that if you damage your credibility with any part of the population, then at times when you really want people to listen, say there's another pandemic or, some other instance that you really want people to be listening to the advice of government, if you've undermined their credibility, it's a bit like the boy who cried wolf. If you've shot your credibility or it's been damaged in other kinds of ways, then people aren't going to really listen when you need them to.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it myself. Look, I want to thank you for your time today, James. We've covered quite a lot in a short amount of time. Is there anything you've got to add that you can think we might not have covered?
No, I think look, yeah, it's annoying, well, annoying to say the least. It's really frustrating to see the government at the moment, at least, appearing just to double down on the same policies that have got us in this mess in the first place. And yeah, there are a number of countries that do this a lot better. If you look in Sweden, I mean, we've mentioned that already, but their cigarette prices are about half what they are here. But they have, yeah, that improved access to less harmful nicotine products. Not just vapes, but things like nicotine pouches as well, which have been banned here in Australia. And the only legal recreational form of nicotine you're allowed in this country is tobacco smoking, which is, it's associated with the most amount of
Crazy.
harm out of any form of nicotine consumption. So, from a harm reduction perspective, which is, the perspective that I come from, in terms of the best ways to reduce the harms associated with not just nicotine, but any drug, is to recognize that people are going to use this. If we take nicotine, for example, national consumption of nicotine, which we've been measuring in wastewater analysis for, I think it's about 7 years now, shows that nicotine consumption is as high as it's ever been. So there's a strong, persistent demand for nicotine in this country, and the more legal avenues and obstacles we put in the way of people getting access to that nicotine means more of it goes to the black market. We get less control, and we amplify rather than reduce many of the harms that are associated with it.
Absolutely. A lot better to have safer methods, and we're a lot better, I think, to tell our governments that we want things reviewed more than once every 3 years, not just referring to the AIHW study survey that you just referred to earlier. I'm also talking about the current bill that's on that got passed earlier this year, the therapeutic goods bill. They had a choice to review it within a year or 3 years, but the senators overwhelmingly, sadly, they voted to review it once every 3 years. I think reviewing laws is something we need to do a hell of a lot better in this country. Have you got anything quickly to add to that, James?
I couldn't agree more. I think there is no argument against saying we need robust evaluation of both the intended and unintended consequences of any policy, let alone one that is demonstrably causing these unintended consequences. And I don't think there's any credible argument to say that there shouldn't be these robust evaluations, and that we need to look at all the policy measures that are available to us rather than just ruling things out, or even worse, the government in the tobacco space continuing to commit to future tax increases that are just almost certainly going to make this problem worse rather than better.
Excellent, well said. And lovely to have a neutral point of view from somebody who definitely doesn't have any links, contacts, or payments from the tobacco industry. That is just being honest based on your how long have you been doing the criminology gig for?
Over a decade. I don't know, maybe. I got my PhD in 2013, but I was working years before that, teaching and doing research. So a while now.
But don't just let any numpty on the TED Talk stage, let me tell you, listeners. Thank you once again, Dr. James Martin. I hope we can stay in contact, and maybe we'll do it again, and hopefully not too often, because we don't want to talk about criminally stuff all the time. We want to just do our thing and stay alive. Well, thank you once again, listeners, for joining us here today on today's podcast, on our Staying Alive podcast. And till next time, keep staying alive. Stay smoke-free. Doesn't matter how you do it. As long as you're, feeling better. You've got to have an extra day with a loved one, because that is what it's all about here. AliveAdvocacyMovement.com. Let's play the jingle.
Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk. I'm a woman.
Don't forget, head over to AliveAdvocacyMovement.com. Follow us on all the social medias. We're on Facebook. We're on X. We're on Instagram. We are even on TikTok now. Go figure. Go and check it out. And we'll see you soon.